the Trump trade and tariffs and how does that affect businesses and fashion. So for guys that haven't been able to keep up, Trump has had a lot of controversy around the tariffs that he has implemented. And yesterday in the morning, Wednesday morning, he actually announced that there would be a 90-day grace period on the tariffs, which means that he essentially paused some of the crazy tariffs for certain countries. And what it meant is that all the markets went up because the markets were really unsure about how this would affect the companies. Companies were in disarray. And with him pausing a lot of the tariffs and just having a flat fee, it now allows a lot of companies to have time to actually think about what they're going to do, where they're going to move production, who are they going to hire, does it make sense for them to produce in the US, does it make sense to produce elsewhere? And so as a result of that, a lot of the stocks went up. There is a lot of accusations against Trump around the fact that this could potentially be insider trading because, Trump told people literally now would be a good time to invest before he literally announced the 90-day period. So in a way, a lot of people have said, is this insider trading? Should Trump be under investigation for this? Because a lot of people that are Trump supporters did invest a lot of money and saw a 20% increase in their stocks immediately that this was announced. So that was crazy. As far as fashion, which is my main focus, I think that this is definitely a very good thing for fashion because now brands actually have some time. It's not a long period of time. And I think this probably will be extended because once again, and like I said in my initial stream, I didn't think that the way that Trump implemented the tariffs made any sense because it was too fast. It didn't give any business any time to really think about what their strategy would be. It was too abrupt, and that's why we've now seen Trump walk back on them. I do think that there are some arguments as to why, like some valid arguments as to why Trump did it the way he did it. The most valid argument I've seen is that the reason why Trump made it so abrupt and why his formula didn't make any sense, which we'll get to, and why, this idea that they tariff us, so we're sending them tariffs back, and this whole thing, even though the calculations didn't make any sense, the reason why he did it that way is to force countries into negotiating a better deal. And so the actual point was not having the math be correct, because the math being correct doesn't mean anything when your ultimate goal is to just go into negotiations so you negotiate a better deal. So if that's the case, if that's what Trump is doing, it makes half sense. But if that isn't what he's doing, then it's a whole mess, to be honest. But yeah, we'll see about the insider trading and see if, he actually gets investigated. I don't think he will. I think that Trump is definitely above the law. We've definitely seen so many cases where I feel like Trump could do anything and be above the law, to be honest, at this point. So, we'll see how that goes. It's 100% insider trading. A president, he is immune to fraud charges. Trump is above the law. Yes, he very much is. He's going to pardon himself. I think that any other president or former president that told people to raid the Capitol would never be allowed to become a president again. But like we say, Trump is above the law. So, it's different. It came for the runway analysis, stay for the political analysis. I have to talk about politics because it affects the fashion industry. This is not a political channel, by the way, but I do talk about politics when it does affect fashion business because that's this channel's main focus. Fashion. So that's why I've been talking about Trump a lot recently, because he's been making a lot of decisions that affect us all, even those of us that work in the fashion industry. So that's why it's a big focus. But anyway, let's read the Financial Times article that really talks about the reasons why Trump, paused a lot of these tariffs and what that means for the markets and how that affected the markets in the short term. So let's read. Donald Trump on Wednesday announced a 90-day pause to the sweeping tariffs he unleashed on all major US trading partners last week, triggering immediate relief on Wall Street as he backed down from a policy that threatened to upend global trade. At the same time, Trump boosted tariffs on China to 125%, doubling down on his trade war with the world's second largest economy. Now, that was very interesting because something that Trump said in his statement was that, when I announced these tariffs, loads of countries, in his words, came begging to me for a trade deal and to negotiate terms. And the only country that didn't negotiate terms was China, because as some of you might know that are following, China actually gave the US their own tariffs, and they had some reciprocal hitbacks for the US, and Trump didn't like that. So, of course, he then put that insane tariff on China, like absolutely insane tariff on China. And that was the only thing that he did. And then everyone else kind of has the pause period. So we'll see how that affects a lot of companies that produce in China, especially in the short term. We'll see how that affects, consumer goods, like things that people are buying day to day, how expensive that might become in like a month or so. That would be interesting to see, but let's read on. The pause on Trump's so-called reciprocal tariff scheme is the latest in a series of U-turns and reversals made by the US president in the chaotic trade policy rollout since his inauguration in January. So the first section, which is why did Trump pause the tariffs? The breadth and size of US tariffs on its major trading partners triggered a global sell-off in equities and attracted rare criticism of Trump from Republican lawmakers on Capitol Hill. Now, this is very, very important to note because and I talked about this in my last stream, something I hate about politics in general, I don't think any person should worship any politician. I don't think anyone should ultimately pick a side in the sense of this person is all good or this person is all good. Because from my understanding of just history, there are both sides that say like the Democrats and Republicans have a history of, the slave trade and supporting the slave trade and racism and genocides. Both of them do. So no side is necessarily, free of any sort of war crimes. No side is completely, angelic and is, amazing. And the worst thing is that a lot of people just like, if they're a Trump supporter, everything that Trump says is law and that's it. And if you're a Democrat, then everything that the Democratic side is saying is law. And I think when it comes to stuff like this, where everyone, is affected by it, I definitely think that it's very telling that Republican supporters and Republican lawmakers are very against what Trump is doing, because so many Republicans just are Republicans blindly, right? They're just like, whatever Trump says, we do. And it's so telling that even they are like, okay, let's slow down here. I think we need to think about the way that we are rolling out these policies. We need to think about the way that we are rolling out these tariffs. I think that's extremely telling. Super, super telling. But let's read on. Multiple billionaire financiers also slammed the levies, including some of the Republican Party's biggest backers. Explaining his decision on Wednesday, Trump referred to the global market rout, which had extended to a sell-off in the US Treasuries, and said people were getting yippy. You have to have flexibility, Trump told reporters. His decision broke as his top trade negotiator, Jameson Greer, was giving testimony to lawmakers on Capitol Hill. What the fuck? Who's in charge? Stephen Horsford, the Democratic lawmaker from Nevada, shouted at Greer moments after Trump announced the pause. The president of the United States is in charge, Greer replied. That's funny. So now this is which tariffs are left. Also, I'll tell you quickly, from a European standpoint and a UK standpoint. So for people that aren't following, once again, because I know some of you might not be that interested in this, but you should, because it's going to affect you. So in the EU and the UK, we were planning reciprocal tariffs. However, those have been paused because there is a 90-day pause period. So that also gives countries times to further, put into place how exactly they are going to fight back with the tariffs that are inevitably going to supposedly be reenacted after 90 days, after the 90-day pause period. So if anything, that also leaves space for a lot of countries to have an even better retaliation because they have more time to think about it, especially in the EU, where a lot of countries have to come together and actually come up with these ideas and kind of what would be the best decision for all of the countries that are part of the EU. So it's all a mess. It's really, really all a mess. It's all a mess. It's really a mess. But reading on, the US now has a 10% baseline tariff on imports on all countries, including the EU, with exemptions for chips, copper, lumber, pharmaceuticals, billion energy, and minerals not found in the US. Autos and auto parts also dodged the 10% levy, but they remain subject to a separate 25% tariff introduced by Trump last month. So that was something that European countries did do to the US, where that one of their retaliatory tariffs was on the auto side of the US company. So you see the likes of Harley Davidson, their prices might go up a lot because a lot of their auto parts are made in the EU. And so therefore, if the EU puts crazy tariffs on the auto industry in the US, a lot of US automotive companies will be bleeding. They will be suffering. And that's the funny thing about these tariffs. You need to think, because a lot of people act like, you know, Trump is putting these tariffs in and it's going to be a net positive for the US. And even if, and that's a big if, there's an overall net positive for the US, there will be certain industries that are affected more than others. So where some industries might, you know, benefit, other industries will suffer. One of the big industries that will suffer is the automotive industry, first of all. The fashion industry is going to suffer, which is obviously my concern. So it's very funny that people act like all these tariffs are in a vacuum. Like if you work in a certain sector and these tariffs disproportionately affect the sector that you work in, you literally will be out of a job. Yes, you supporting these tariffs and acting like there's going to be some like weird net positive where every single person in the US is going to, you know, benefit from these tariffs. That's not really how it works. And that's just not how it works. But reading on, Mexico and Canada had avoided the worst reciprocal tariff regime, but Washington last month applied tariffs of 25% to all imports from its two neighbors that did not abide by the terms of their 2023 trade deal. The White House confirmed on Wednesday that the 25% tariff would remain in place. Levies of 25% on all steel and aluminium imports into the US will stay, and probes that could lead to tariffs on copper and lumber are continuing. So that's also very crazy. Of course, Trump has said that 70 countries are queuing up to strike agreements in Washington. And I think that is, if you want to see it that way, that is the only potential silver lining, that the reason why Trump did this crazy stuff is because he wanted to force countries into negotiating a trade deal, and that's actually the main point. That's the only valid argument from all of this that I've ever seen. Every other argument that I've seen supporting the tariffs don't actually make a lot of sense, to be honest. And Trump's tariffs are a distraction from his legal troubles and multiple indictments. His tariffs also divert attention from foreign policy failures, economic weaknesses, and other damaging headlines. Yeah, for sure. This YouTube channel runs on your support. If you want to support the channel, you can subscribe to my Patreon. You'll gain access to exclusive content that includes everything from my Patreon podcast, where I give a behind-the-scenes insight into the fashion industry, as well as a fashion book club where I review my favorite fashion books. You can also check out my fashion ebook, which highlights the best fashion journalists to follow, definitions of common fashion terminology, and how to determine what a good source of fashion information is. The links to everything are in the description below.